Alright guys, so let's talk a bit about data types that we have available in Clojure. Now, Clojure provides us with a lot of available data types, okay? Some of them are inherited from Java, since Clojure is based off of Java, and some of them are specific to the language, and kind of a multitude of these composes all of the available data types. So let's talk a bit about a few of them in this lecture. Now, what I'm going to do, because I do like to code while I'm explaining and while I'm learning stuff, let's define a function in our functions file. Let's define a function that will allow us to try out these data types. Okay, so I'm going to say defn, okay, data types. That takes no parameters. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a keyword that we're going to talk about in the next lecture, but we use it to basically define a variable, and that keyword is def. Okay, we've already used that keyword to define a variable of a function. Now we're going to use it to define a variable that is a data type. Okay, so first off, we have integers, of course, so we can define, regular integer numbers, right? So I've just defined a variable here called a, okay, and lower down I'm going to simply print line that a variable. All right, and at the end of the function I'm just going to call it so that it just displays everything on screen. So if I do load that file into my REPL, then I will get the print line for that variable, right? So that is the first data type. It is a integer. Now, of course, Clojure allows us to define floats. So I can say b 1.25, okay? And if I duplicate that line and I do print b, and I'm going to load that, I get 125. That is the float value that we defined for this b variable, okay? So now we're focusing on data types, not on variables. So let's basically talk about the values that we defined here. All right, so if I define another one, to duplicate the line, by the way, I hit Command D. There should be a similar key shortcut for the PC. So I'm going to name this C. And now I want to define a float, but as a scientific notation. So it's going to be 1.25 e minus 12, let's say, right? This is the scientific notation for defining a float. And if I run that, actually I need to print that as well. Now I can run that. I get this scientific notation 125 float. All right, now Clojure allows us to define also hex values, okay? So I can say DOX, that's a hex value, and I can say FBFC, okay? That's a hex value, and when we actually run this, it will transform that hex value into a decimal value here. All right, so we get 64,508. Written hex is FBFC. Now, if you don't know what hex is, it's basically notations the same way we have decimal values that go from 0 to 9. Hex value go from 0, 9, A for 10, B for 11, C, D, E, and F, okay, up to 15. And it allows us to write code more efficiently, write numbers more efficiently, and it is quite well suited for programming because we do store a lot of the variables in bytes, right? So it allows us to make use of all the bytes in a very efficient way. So you can see that with just 4 letters here, I've defined quite a large number. All right, so another couple of values that I have here, let's say E and that's F. Of course, we have the null value, or in Clojure we call that nil, and we have Boolean value, so true or false, right? So I've just put here true, and if we print those two as well, E and F, if I run that, I get nil and true. So these are, again, data types. The nil data type is kind of the default data type when we don't have anything else to return in a function. And true and or false, that's obviously the Boolean value data types, right? And of course we have string. So I can say something like hello, and I'm going to give it a name G. And if I print that, we've seen strings before, like here, here, and so on. But just to kind of make it complete, we have hello here. One more data type I want to talk about is the keyword. Okay, so we can define something like a keyword that's preceded by a single quote, and that can be like hello. Okay, and actually let's not use hello, let's use thanks. And we can print that, and that will give us basically a keyword, which is just a word that we can use as a reference in multiple parts of the code, right? And that will just print out similarly to a string, it will just print out the thanks keyword. So if we run that, we get here the keyword. Okay, so we can basically use this later on in the course anywhere we like as a reference that we can relate to in different functions. Now, in addition to these data types that I've talked about, we have a lot of other data types that I'm not going to write in code, but it's good to know that they are there. So first of all, integers can be expanded into a lot more data types. Okay, so we have like short integers, long integers, we have octal numbers. Okay, we talked about hexadecimal numbers. Next up, we have atoms. Okay, that allows us to represent synchronous independent state. And of course, we have the classic types that are inherited from Java. And these are byte, short, integer, long, float, and double. Okay, so all these are taken from Java and are represented exactly the same way in Clojure. And that allows Clojure to map really, really well to the Java data types without any problems. So that's it for data types. These are all the types that we're going to talk about. And in the future lecture, I'm going to talk about variables and how we assign these data types to variables. So thank you for following along, and I'll see you in the next one.